morning, happy Monday, how are you? Well, today I'd like to talk about failure. I mean, do you ever think you've failed? We often go into that feeling, don't we? We think we've done something wrong or something hasn't worked out the way we thought it was going to, and then we think we've failed and we feel like a failure. But what is failure? I mean, how can it even exist? It can't, can it? Because you can't put failure in your hands. You can't put it in your pocket. You can't say, oh, I think I'm really failing today. I can't cope. I'm going to put some in my pocket. Because it isn't there, is it? It isn't something you can pick up. It doesn't actually exist anywhere outside your own thinking about it. So something happens and we get into a thought that we failed, and then we feel like a failure. We have more thoughts about failing and the cycle continues. We keep having the same thoughts. They go, they come back, they go, they come back. We keep reigniting the same neural pathway. Oh, I failed, I'm a failure. If you think about Thomas Edison, when he was asked by reporters after the 1000th attempt at the light bulb had failed, and they asked how it felt to be that his latest attempt had failed and how did it feel to be a failure, he said, but it hasn't failed. I've had 1,000 ways that it hasn't succeeded. And isn't that a lovely way to look at it? Because, as I say, failure can't actually exist in and of itself. How about something that we do without thinking? How about when children fall over when they start walking? Do they ever think that they've failed? Do they think, oh, I'm a failure, I can't walk, I'm never going to be able to be a walker, I'm just going to sit here, sit my life out because I've failed at walking? Of course not. They don't even think about it, do they? They just get up and try again because they don't have any thinking about it. They don't have any self-judgment. They don't have any thoughts about how they imagine other people are judging them. And that's what it really comes down to, doesn't it? The thoughts we're having. So think about some of the areas that we feel that we fail in. You know, I often have clients come to me because they think they either have failed or they are failing as a parent. Well, again, how? Everything that you do as a parent, you're doing because that's the thing that occurs to you to do. So hindsight is wonderful. If you look back, you might think, oh, I wish I'd handled that situation differently. But at the time of the situation, you handled it in the only way you knew how to do at that moment. But we have an idea, again, don't we, of what a parent should be. We create an ideal of the perfect parent, and then we want to fit into that ideal. And then if we don't fit into the ideal that we create, we feel like a failure. Now, also, there's nothing more guaranteed than a child telling you that you're not a good parent, because, you know, they'll always say to you they want to go somewhere and everyone else's parents is letting their particular child go, and why won't you let me go? And, oh, you're not a very good mum because you won't let me go, and on and on and on. One of my mentors, I heard him talking one day about he and his wife, and they decided when the children were very young that they weren't going to force them to do anything. So if they wanted piano lessons, they could have them. If they didn't want them, they didn't have to have them. And then when his eldest daughter was in her teens, he heard her talking to her friend, and the friend was talking, I think, about tennis lessons, that she had to go and have a tennis lesson. And he heard his daughter say, oh, you're so lucky. My parents didn't make me do anything. And he realised at that moment that whatever you do as a parent, you're going to be wrong at some point. So that doesn't mean that you've failed, because you've done your very best for your child. And imagining that you've failed as a parent also is presupposing that your child doesn't have their own resilience, resourcefulness and ideas. So if your child gets himself into a bit of a muddle, what has that got to do with you? Because that's not a failure on your part, is it? You don't need to take on everybody else's business. Even if you love them as much as you love your child, you don't need to take on their business and apply it to yourself. But again, when we think of a parent, when we think of the ideal mother or the ideal father, we have ideas in our head. You know, we may even, as a mother, have these crazy ideas about somebody like Ma Larkin, you know, the epitome of the perfect mother, who always had something baking and was always jolly and always had the right answer. But it's a fictional character. So we have an idea about what we think the perfect parent is, and then we get upset with ourselves when we're not matching the idea that we have created. Or you might think of your partner, your husband, your wife, your partner, and you might think, well, they're not being a very good parent because they're not doing it the way I think it should be done. But again, it's an idea that we have. So it's impossible to fail as a parent unless it's impossible to fail as a parent. You are a parent and you're doing your best. Whatever happens, you are doing your best. And even, as I say, if years later you feel that you could have done something differently, well, as I say, you did what occurred to you then. So how about in relationships? Do we think we failed in a relationship if the relationship doesn't last? Again, how? Now, you may have met somebody when you were 17 and 20 or 30 years later still be with that somebody. And if you're happy, fantastic. But if you're not, recognise that in all of those years you've changed. You're not going to be the same person you were when you were 17 anyway. So why would it be a failure if actually you realise that your needs were different now, or your wants, or just that you really love that person but you'd really like to go and sail around the world on your own or something like that? Again, it's an idea that we have about the perfect relationship. We think the perfect relationship should always be loving and supportive and hardly ever a cross word. And no, that's fiction. When I was at university, I remember talking to an English professor about Mills and Boon. And I said to her, does it matter really if people are reading Mills and Boon? Because at least they're reading something, and it's a form of taking their mind elsewhere. And she was totally against it. She said, no, these stories are pernicious. These stories poison people, because people then, the readers of something like Mills and Boon, then have this idea of what the relationship should be. And so they then get very disappointed when their own relationships don't follow that pattern, and they think they've failed. But they can't fail. Again, if you go into a relationship, you go in, I assume, with love and hope and happiness and joy and caring about the other person. How is that failing? You change, they change. That's still not failing, is it? And how about at work? People often feel like they've failed at work because maybe they're not getting the promotions they think they deserve. Or maybe they get into thinking that they're not as good as the people around them, or that their bosses think that they aren't good enough. And so they start to get into that frame of mind. Maybe they've made a mistake in a report they're doing, or in a project. In my very first job, I had to send out invitations to a fairly important cocktail party. At this cocktail party, there were lots of competitors and lots of people that the company wanted to raise money from, and it was an important cocktail party to the company I worked for. And I sent out the invitations, and then they all kept coming back with nothing on them. And I realised that I had asked everybody to RSVP, and I had put a stamped addressed envelope inside the invitation. But what I'd done is I'd put the invitation into the stamped addressed envelope, so they all just got returned back to the company, and nobody actually received the invitations, and they had to reschedule the cocktail party. I wasn't very popular. Now, you could say I failed, and I'm sure people did think I failed, but it was a genuine mistake, failure or not. Now, that wasn't going to blight my life. Maybe they wouldn't ask me to arrange a cocktail party in the future, but hey-ho. But, when we start to get into what we think other people are thinking about us when we make a mistake, well, we're far more likely to make another mistake, aren't we? Because we're already in those feelings of failure and not good enough, and I can't do this right. There's often a culture, and this has been around forever, of people staying very late in the office. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but what often happens is somebody stays late, and then the people around them look at that person staying late, and they think, oh, if I go now, people will think I'm being irresponsible, that I'm not taking my job as importantly as he or she does. So they start staying late, and before you know it, if the time that their working day is supposed to finish at maybe 5:30, People are staying till 8 or 9 o'clock. Now that's ridiculous, isn't it? But they people get into a cycle of thinking that if they leave earlier, they will be perceived as a failure, as not being good enough as other people, as not being as committed to their job. You know, in the first job I had, the job with the cocktail party invitation, there were two owners of the company, and I worked in the headquarters where the owners were. And every now and again, one of the owners, the directors, would walk through the office space, and it was all open plan office at the time, mostly open plan. They would walk through. Now the line managers would all have their own office, so the open space were all the people that worked for the line managers, and he would walk through at 5:30, maybe 6 o'clock at a push, and he would notice who was there. Now a lot of people thought that was good, that oh, he notices I'm still at work, that, you know, he'll think I'm really good at my job, that I'm really committed and conscientious. And actually what happened, which I thought was very, very good, was the director of the company went to the line managers and said, why are your people still working past their working day? Either you're giving them too much work or you're not line managing them properly. I want the building cleared by 6 o'clock at the latest. Now, that was his idea of failure was the people were still staying there. So either they were failing to get their work done during the day, which was down to the line manager, or he could see that they'd all bought into this culture of having to stay because they thought everybody else was staying. So he had a completely reverse opinion about failure at work, which I thought was amazing. The whole idea of failure is a construct. And the idea of failure is causing us to feel separate. It's like back to the I have failed. And that's fostering the idea of separateness. Because the I that have failed must be different, it must be outside the common consciousness. And it can't be. Because if we're all part of the same consciousness, either one fails or we all fail. But we can't all fail because there is no failure. Do we think that daffodils fail after they've bloomed and die? No, of course they don't fail. They just get ready to bloom again the next year. So there's no idea of failure that doesn't come from us. And my idea of failure isn't going to be the same as your idea of failure, because it's all self-opinion, it's all judgment, it's all coming from our own thoughts. So let go of the idea of failure. Let go of ever thinking that you can fail. Really, if there really was failure, if failure existed, we wouldn't have football teams, would we? For me, that might not be a bad thing, but for many of you, I'm sure that would be terrible. Because if a football team lost, well, they'd failed. What was the point of trying again? They were failures. Well, of course they aren't failures. They just lost that one game. I say let go of every idea of failure that you've ever had, because it's entirely made up. It's self-created and you can pop that balloon. Okay, I hope you have a very successful week and I shall see you next Monday. Okay, bye-bye.